Did you ever imagine a moment so severe that it could erase a marriage with a single phone call? Not an argument, not a trial separation, not a carefully worded statement released through publicists. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. A phone call. According to multiple unverified reports circulating behind palace walls and media circles, Prince Harry allegedly reached a point where he didn't ask for counseling, mediation, or time apart. He asked for lawyers. Divorce lawyers. And not quietly. If even part of what insiders are hinting at is true, this wasn't an emotional outburst. It was calculated, final, and deeply unsettling to those who heard about it. Because when someone reaches for legal counsel before reaching for their spouse, it usually means one thing. Something has already broken beyond repair. But what could possibly push a man who uprooted his life, abandoned his country, and defied his family for love to allegedly say the words, "She's no longer my wife"? That's the question sending shockwaves through royal watchers, commentators, and even longtime supporters who once believed this marriage was unbreakable. And before we go any further, let's be clear about one thing. What you're about to hear is not a confirmed legal filing. There has been no official announcement, no court documents made public, no statement from either side. What exists instead are whispers, timelines that don't quite add up, silence where there used to be noise, and a sudden shift in behavior that has people asking a very uncomfortable question. Is this the beginning of the end? Or did it already end long before the public ever noticed? Stay with me, because to understand why this moment matters so much, we have to rewind. Not just weeks, not just months, years. Because this story didn't begin with a shocking discovery. It began with a promise of escape, of freedom, of rewriting history. When Prince Harry first stepped away from royal duties, the world was told it was about peace, mental health, protection, love, a man choosing his wife over an institution that had failed him. That narrative was powerful, emotional, convincing. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people didn't want to examine at the time. Decisions made under emotional pressure don't always age well, especially when they're made quickly, publicly, and with no clear path back. Ask yourself this. How many people do you know who made the biggest decision of their life during a period of extreme stress and didn't later question it? Exactly. In the years since that dramatic exit, we've watched a steady drip of contradictions. Public interviews followed by walkbacks. Explosive accusations paired with selective silence. Projects announced with confidence, then quietly shelved. Friendships fading. Family ties severed. And a man who once laughed easily now appearing guarded, tense, and visibly worn down. Was it pressure from the media? Was it the weight of royal exile? Or was it something happening much closer to home? Because here's where things get interesting. In recent months, observers have noted a distinct shift in how Prince Harry appears publicly. Not louder, not angrier, quieter, more withdrawn, less reactive. That's not how people behave when they're confident in their situation. That's how people behave when they're processing something heavy, something disorienting, something that forces them to replay years of memories and ask, "How did I miss this?" And according to alleged insider chatter, there was a moment, a specific moment, a realization that didn't arrive through gossip or headlines, but through something far more destabilizing. A discovery. Now before speculation runs wild, let's slow down. Because the word discovery doesn't automatically mean scandal. Sometimes it means pattern recognition. Sometimes it means connecting dots that were always there but never lined up before. And sometimes it means realizing the story you believed wasn't the full story. Imagine for a second what that feels like. Imagine defending someone publicly, fiercely, for years, burning bridges for them, sacrificing family, reputation, and identity, only to suddenly wonder if you were fighting a battle using someone else's script. Wouldn't that make you angry? Wouldn't that make you question everything? Wouldn't that make you wonder who you've become in the process? According to people claiming knowledge of the situation, Prince Harry didn't react with immediate rage. He reacted with something far more dangerous to a relationship. Distance. Emotional withdrawal is often the final stage before a major rupture. It's what happens when confrontation feels pointless because the conclusion has already formed internally. And here's where the timeline starts raising eyebrows. Around the same period these rumors began circulating, Harry's public schedule shifted. Appearances became more solo. Messaging grew vague. Statements that once spoke in collective terms quietly switched to singular language. Small details, easy to ignore, unless you're looking for them. So ask yourself this. If everything was fine behind the scenes, why the sudden change? Why the silence? Why the lack of visible unity during moments that once would have been carefully curated? And perhaps most telling of all, why hasn't there been a strong denial? In the past, even minor rumors were met with swift rebuttals, lawsuits, or sharply worded corrections. This time, there's nothing. No outrage. No indignation. Just quiet. Silence doesn't always mean guilt, but it almost always means strategy. And strategy usually involves lawyers. According to the reports, the alleged phone call wasn't emotional. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't late at night after an argument. It was allegedly placed during business hours. Calm. Direct. Harry, sources claim, asked not about reconciliation, not about image management, but about options. Legal options. What happens if ties are cut completely? What happens if communication stops? What happens if assets, contracts, and responsibilities are disentangled? Those aren't the questions of someone seeking reassurance. Those are the questions of someone preparing for separation. And that's where the phrase reportedly attributed to him sent a chill through everyone who heard it. She's no longer my wife. Not legally. Not yet. But emotionally. An emotional divorce always comes first. Think about that for a moment. How many marriages end long before paperwork is filed? How many relationships collapse quietly while the world still believes in the image? That's why this moment matters now. Because if this is true, we're not watching the beginning of a breakup. We're watching the final chapter of a process that's been unfolding in silence. And the shocking discovery everyone keeps hinting at? That's not the end of the story. It's the spark. Because once someone realizes they've been operating without full information, the mind doesn't rest. It starts replaying every conversation, every argument, every decision that felt off at the time but was dismissed. And that's when the most painful question of all emerges. Was I manipulated, or did I willingly ignore the signs? That question doesn't just threaten a marriage. It threatens identity, purpose, self-respect. Prince Harry's entire post-royal life has been built around a single narrative. That he escaped, that he chose love, that he saw the truth before anyone else. What happens if he starts to wonder whether the truth was curated? What happens if the story he told the world starts to unravel in his own mind? Because when that happens, the fallout isn't just personal. It's public, it's legal, and it's irreversible. But here's the part no one is talking about yet. If Harry truly reached out to divorce lawyers, he didn't just signal the end of a marriage. He signaled the beginning of a much larger reckoning. One involving children, finances, contracts, and narratives that have been carefully constructed for years. And those narratives? They don't disappear quietly. They fight back. Which brings us to the next part of this story. The part that allegedly explains why this decision wasn't announced, but instead prepared in silence. Because according to insiders, the lawyers weren't the first people Prince Harry contacted that day. And who he reached out to next may explain everything. Did anyone ever really stop to ask why this marriage moved so fast? Not just in the eyes of the public, engagements, ceremonies, media headlines, but in private, behind palace walls, away from the cameras, away from the red carpets and tabloid frenzy. From the very beginning, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's relationship unfolded at a pace that was dizzying. A whirlwind romance in which a prince and an American actress met, dated, became engaged, and were married in a matter of months. Some called it modern love. Others whispered caution, warnings that were easily ignored in the face of glittering headlines and viral moments. It's easy to look back now and romanticize those early days. The photographs, the smiles, the global fascination, the feeling that the world was watching love bloom in real time. But underneath the glamour, according to sources who claim to have observed the couple up close, there were subtle signs of strain. Signs that were dismissed as the growing pains of any high-profile romance, but were actually early indicators of pressure mounting beneath the surface. Ask yourself this. How does one navigate a marriage when every action is scrutinized by millions? Every comment dissected, every outfit critiqued, every smile analyzed for sincerity? When the world has a seat at your private moments, does the intimacy survive? Or is it constantly under siege? Insiders allege that even before the vows were exchanged, tension existed. Differences in upbringing, culture, and personal values began to surface almost immediately. Decisions that might have been simple for most couples became fraught with implications. Even the choice of wedding vendors, venues, and ceremonial details reportedly sparked disagreement. One source said that Harry's loyalty to tradition often clashed with Meghan's desire for autonomy and modernity. And then there was the family. The scrutiny of the royal family, the media frenzy, and the endless comparisons to Diana, Kate, and historical royal expectations. For Harry, family expectations weren't just peripheral. They were a weight that had shaped his life from birth. Meghan, on the other hand, was navigating not only a new country and a new life, but an institution that demanded public perfection while offering little private guidance. As the wedding approached, the pressure only intensified. Public appearances, interviews, charity engagements, they were no longer about love. They were about narrative control, about perception, about convincing the world that this marriage was ideal, unstoppable, and destined to thrive. But according to insiders, the private reality was different. Arguments over small matters escalated quickly, emotional reactions were magnified by stress, and reconciliation required compromises that sometimes felt impossible. And then, of course, came the media. Tabloids, paparazzi, television networks, social media commentators, all offering unsolicited advice, criticism, and praise. Every misstep was magnified, every smile questioned. What was once a personal choice now became public property. And when privacy is stripped away, intimacy struggles to survive. The stories of betrayal, of miscommunication, of hurt feelings, the ones hidden from the public, grew heavier with every passing day. But perhaps most critical of all was the speed of the commitment. While the world celebrated, insiders claimed that the rapid progression left little room for real adjustment, real understanding, real compromise. Decisions made in the heat of infatuation or under pressure to meet expectations can create fissures that widen over time, especially when combined with the weight of fame, family, and public scrutiny. By the time the wedding day arrived, the cracks were reportedly visible to those closest to the couple, not obvious to the outside world, which saw only smiles, gowns, and pomp. But to friends, advisors, and family, the signs were there. Tension, muted disagreements, and moments of doubt quietly tucked away behind polite laughter and public composure. And yet, despite these early warning signs, Harry and Meghan pushed forward. Perhaps out of love, perhaps out of fear of failure. Perhaps because once you've gone public, there is no turning back without consequence. The momentum became unstoppable. And as insiders suggest, the very forces that accelerated their union, media attention, public adoration, and global fascination, would later contribute to its unraveling. So, consider this. What happens when a relationship that began in a whirlwind is later tested by extraordinary circumstances, by distance, expectations, fame, and personal revelation? What begins as excitement can mutate into stress, anxiety, and eventually disillusionment. And that disillusionment, if left unchecked, doesn't just quietly fade, it erupts. According to insiders, those eruptions were subtle at first. Quiet disagreements, private moments of frustration, disagreements about minor events. But the foundation had already been shaken. Every small argument now carried the weight of prior unresolved tension. Every decision felt amplified because the couple was no longer just two people. They were symbols, celebrities, and subjects of constant speculation. And here's the hardest truth. In relationships built under this kind of pressure, the moments that should have been intimate, simple gestures of love, apologies, conversations, often become battlegrounds. Every word is analyzed, every action scrutinized, and what would normally be minor misunderstandings are now magnified into crises. So, when reports began circulating that Harry allegedly reached out to divorce lawyers, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of pressure, acceleration, and stress that no one outside the inner circle could fully comprehend. It raises another uncomfortable question. When a marriage exists simultaneously in public perception and private reality, which one ultimately shapes the truth? The smiles and photographs? The headlines? or the hidden, quieter moments that never make it into the story? And perhaps this is why the alleged discovery that followed had such a profound impact. Because it wasn't just about a single act, a single betrayal, or a single lie. It was the recognition that the life Harry had been living, the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had endured, the public persona he had cultivated, might have been built on assumptions that weren't entirely accurate. Imagine the weight of that realization. The shock, the disbelief, the moment when you look back and realize the narrative you've defended for years may not be the one you believed it to be. According to insiders, that is precisely the psychological terrain in which Harry allegedly found himself. A space of confusion, anger, and the kind of clarity that comes not from insight, but from unavoidable confrontation with reality. And it is here, in this space, where the pressure that began with a whirlwind romance eventually matured into a breaking point, where the marriage that looked perfect from the outside may have been quietly fracturing from the inside, where the man who once risked everything for love allegedly decided that lawyers, not conversations, were the only path forward. But the story doesn't end with pressure. Pressure explains the environment, the stress, the tension, but it doesn't explain the trigger. The discovery that reportedly changed everything. The revelation that led to that infamous phrase, allegedly spoken in private, but now echoing through palace corridors. She's no longer my wife. And that discovery, the one no one saw coming, is what we'll explore next. It's the spark that lit the fuse. And it's a moment so significant, insiders claim, that everything that follows is shaped by it. But what exactly did Harry discover? And why would it force him to take steps so drastic that even his closest allies were stunned into silence? That's what we'll uncover in the next chapter, because the answer is far more personal than any headline has suggested, and it's only just beginning to come to light. Imagine for a moment the feeling of realizing that everything you believed about someone you trusted might not have been entirely true, that the narrative you clung to, defended, and even sacrificed for might have been incomplete, or worse, manipulated. According to insiders who claim to have knowledge of Prince Harry's inner circle, that is exactly the terrain in which he allegedly found himself in recent months. A discovery so shocking, so destabilizing, that it reportedly changed the trajectory of his marriage overnight. Now, we must pause and acknowledge something important. The specifics of this discovery are largely unconfirmed. No court documents, no public statements, no official confirmation. What exists instead are whispers, fragments of timelines, and the recollections of those claiming proximity to the couple. But even these whispers suggest a seismic shift in Harry's perspective. What could possibly constitute a discovery that drives a man to allegedly pick up the phone, call divorce lawyers, and emotionally declare that his marriage is over? According to the sources, it wasn't a single event. It wasn't a text message, a photograph, or a casual conversation overheard. It was the cumulative recognition of patterns, inconsistencies, and private truths that had been obscured deliberately or inadvertently over time. Insiders describe it as a moment of clarity mixed with disbelief, a slow, dawning understanding that certain behaviors, decisions, and revelations didn't align with the story Harry believed he was living. Patterns he hadn't noticed, or perhaps chose not to notice, were suddenly undeniable. One insider reportedly described it as connecting dots that were always there, but you didn't realize the picture was complete. Imagine decades of subtle cues, little contradictions, and moments that felt off being suddenly reinterpreted under a new light. It's disorienting. It's destabilizing. It's the kind of discovery that makes someone question not just another person, but themselves, their judgment, and the choices they've made. Sources suggest that what pushed Harry over the edge wasn't the shock alone. It was the personal nature of the revelation. Not financial mismanagement, not betrayal by a third party, but a deeply personal truth about his marriage, about the person he believed he knew, and about the foundation upon which he had built his post-royal life. And the emotional fallout was immediate. Insiders describe a man who went from disbelief to anger to a resolute, almost chilling, sense of finality. Reports claim that he didn't react impulsively. This wasn't a heated argument that spiraled out of control. This was a calm, deliberate decision. He allegedly contacted lawyers not to threaten, but to understand how quickly and thoroughly ties could be severed. Think about the implications of that. Contacting lawyers before confronting the other party, before attempting reconciliation, before even fully processing the emotional weight. That's the action of someone who has reached a point of no return. Someone whose trust has been fundamentally shattered. What makes this discovery even more remarkable is the alleged timeline. Sources claim that Harry had been processing small suspicions for months, even years, but only recently did everything align. Small signs that were previously dismissed suddenly made sense. Events that seemed insignificant suddenly revealed a troubling pattern. Conversations that felt normal suddenly felt manipulative. And decisions he thought were mutually agreed upon suddenly looked like orchestrations he had overlooked. This is where the psychological aspect becomes critical. When trust erodes slowly, the mind often tries to rationalize, forgive, or suppress. But when a full picture emerges, when the puzzle completes itself, the emotional weight can be overwhelming. According to insiders, that was the stage Harry reached. The puzzle had completed itself. The picture was clear, and the emotional response was decisive. And it wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what it revealed. That the life he believed he had chosen, the decisions he believed were his own, and the sacrifices he had made might have been based on assumptions that were incomplete or misleading. Now, some may ask, could this be an exaggeration? Could it be rumor? Possibly. But what makes it compelling is not just the alleged discovery itself. It's the reaction it triggered. Calm, resolute, and final. According to sources, the decision was not temporary. It was not emotional. It was structural, legal, strategic. A step that would forever alter his personal and public life. And it is here that the story becomes even more intriguing. Because in most high-profile relationships, when a shocking discovery occurs, there's often an immediate confrontation, a dramatic reveal, a fight, a public scandal. But in this case, insiders suggest that Harry's approach was uncharacteristically measured. Instead of confrontation, he sought counsel. Instead of immediate disclosure, he acted quietly, assessing options. Instead of public statements, he chose private strategy. That decision alone, insiders argue, is unprecedented. In a world where almost every royal misstep is publicized, a decision this significant was allegedly kept behind closed doors. The secrecy speaks volumes. It indicates that Harry, according to insiders, understood the stakes, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. The potential consequences were enormous. Emotional, legal, financial, and reputational. And yet, despite these stakes, he allegedly reached a conclusion that left no room for ambiguity. Which brings us to the question on everyone's mind. What exactly was discovered? And why did it provoke such a drastic reaction? Sources are careful to say that while the specifics remain confidential, the discovery involved aspects of personal trust, emotional manipulation, and long-term patterns that undermined the foundation of the marriage. One insider described it as realizing the story you were living wasn't entirely yours. That is a heavy weight to carry, especially for someone who has already lived a life under scrutiny, someone who has already fought for autonomy, and someone who has already faced betrayal, loss, and public criticism. According to insiders, this moment combined all those pressures with a deeply personal revelation, creating a perfect storm of emotion and clarity. And yet, despite the gravity, the discovery was only the beginning. Because once Harry allegedly understood the scope of the truth, the next step was inevitable. Action. And action in this context meant something irreversible. Lawyers were called. Legal pathways were assessed. Emotional detachment began. And the phrase reportedly uttered in private, "She's no longer my wife," signaled a profound shift, not just in status, but in identity, allegiance, and future trajectory. But here's the final, chilling detail. Insiders claim that even after this discovery and the immediate steps taken, Harry did not reveal everything. There remained questions, uncertainties, and potential consequences that no one, not even his closest confidants, had fully processed. Which means that what we have only glimpsed so far is the tip of the iceberg. The discovery triggered action, yes, but the broader implications, the full fallout, the private reckonings, and the strategic decisions yet to come have only begun to unfold. And that is why the next chapter matters. Because after a revelation like this, After the alleged phone call to lawyers, the only way forward is negotiation, confrontation, or complete separation. And what happened next, according to insiders, was something that no one saw coming. Not the media, not the public, not even the closest allies. But before we move to that, consider the emotional magnitude of what this discovery implies. Trust shattered, identity questioned, years of choices suddenly cast in doubt, public perception still intact, while private reality explodes. It's the kind of moment that forces a person to act decisively, because hesitation risks everything: reputation, family, emotional stability. And according to insiders, that is exactly why the phone call happened. Not out of rage, not out of impulse, but out of clarity, a clarity born from a discovery that changed everything. The discovery is complete. What comes next is the direct emotional fallout, the private reckoning, the confrontation with trust, and the decision that allegedly led to the next, irreversible stage of separation. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of being the last person to realize the truth? Not just a minor oversight, but a revelation that everyone else seemed to know before you did? That feeling of isolation, of betrayal, of being left behind in a story you thought you were writing yourself. It's one of the most destabilizing emotions a person can experience. According to sources claiming insight into Prince Harry's inner circle, this is exactly what he allegedly felt in the wake of the shocking discovery that changed everything. The revelation didn't just raise questions about his marriage. It raised questions about his judgment, his choices, and the people closest to him. The sense of being last to know, insiders suggest, compounded the emotional intensity of the situation. Imagine believing you are in a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and shared decision-making, only to discover that key information, patterns, or behaviors were known by others before you ever noticed them. Not maliciously, perhaps, but still hidden, overlooked, or even intentionally obscured. Harry reportedly experienced a cascade of emotions: disbelief, shock, anger, and ultimately a profound sense of isolation. He had defended this marriage, publicly and privately. He had made sacrifices. He had walked away from family, privilege, and tradition. And now, it seemed, some of the critical pieces of the puzzle had been in plain sight all along, and he had been blind to them. According to insiders, one of the most painful aspects wasn't just the discovery itself. It was realizing how little control he may have had over certain aspects of the marriage. When trust erodes gradually, you can rationalize, negotiate, forgive. But when you discover that you were effectively the last person to be aware, the rationalizations collapse. You see your decisions under a new light. Decisions made with faith that the other party shared your understanding, intentions, and values. Imagine the scenario: years of public defense, carefully crafted narratives, loyalty extended at every turn, only to feel blindsided. That is what insiders claim Harry faced. And while the public saw interviews, philanthropy, and appearances, privately, the emotional turmoil was escalating. Friends and advisors reportedly noticed subtle but significant changes. Conversations that were once casual or playful became guarded. Body language suggested tension. Decisions were made more deliberately, with less spontaneity. Observers close to the couple claimed that Harry was withdrawing, not out of anger, but out of necessity, as his mind worked through the implications of realizing he had been last to know. This is a pivotal moment in the story because it reframes everything that follows. It's no longer simply about a discovery or a disagreement. It's about perspective, power, and trust. When a partner feels blindsided, the emotional stakes escalate dramatically. According to insiders, this sense of betrayal is what propelled the next steps. The call to lawyers, the consideration of complete separation, and the eventual emotional declaration that she's no longer my wife. And yet, this is also where the story becomes human, complex, and deeply relatable. Even for someone born into royalty, accustomed to scrutiny, and experienced in public life, the pain of realizing you were left last in the loop is universal. The isolation, the internal questioning, the sleepless nights, the sense that the foundation of your life may have been constructed on an incomplete understanding. Insiders suggest that part of Harry's processing involved reflection on the early years of the marriage. He reportedly revisited conversations, decisions, and pivotal moments, examining them under the harsh light of newfound awareness. Actions that once seemed benign or loving were reevaluated. Patterns that were once dismissed as personality quirks now appeared to have weight and consequence. It's important to note, according to sources, that this is not necessarily about assigning blame. It's about perception and emotional reality. Whether intentional or not, Harry felt blindsided. And that feeling, insiders claim, was immediate, intense, and hard to ignore. Compounding the emotional intensity was the ongoing public narrative. The world had a perception of the marriage that was polished, curated, and largely unassailable. Interviews, philanthropic work, and public appearances continued, giving the impression of normalcy. But privately, according to insiders, Harry was grappling with a profound dissonance between the public image and the private reality. This dissonance, they suggest, fueled the decision-making process that followed. When the truth of being last to know intersects with the responsibilities of parenthood, public image, and personal integrity, decisive action often becomes necessary. And according to insiders, this is exactly the point at which Harry allegedly made the call to divorce lawyers. What makes this moment especially compelling is the human complexity involved. Harry is a man accustomed to public attention, accustomed to controlling narratives, accustomed to managing crises. Yet even he, insiders claim, was shaken to his core. The discovery, combined with the realization that he had been the last to know, created a perfect storm of emotional intensity. It's also worth noting that insiders describe this stage as a turning point, not merely in the marriage, but in Harry's personal journey. For years, he had sought autonomy, freedom, and identity outside of the royal framework. Now, he faced a different kind of autonomy, the realization that he must reclaim agency in his personal life after feeling blindsided. The alleged call to lawyers was not just a legal maneuver, it was an assertion of self. And yet, despite the emotional intensity and the alleged decisive actions, there remained uncertainty. According to sources, Harry's inner circle observed a tension between emotional reaction and strategic thinking. Every step had to be measured, every communication carefully considered, because the ramifications extended far beyond personal feelings. Public perception, legal consequences, and familial relationships were all on the line. And this is where the chapter reaches its mini cliffhanger. Insiders claim that after Harry processed being last to know, and after he made initial calls to legal counsel, another layer of complexity emerged. Something that forced him to reassess not just the marriage but the broader landscape of his personal life, his public identity, and the very foundation of trust he had once taken for granted. What happened next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When a marriage begins to fracture, the emotional stakes are already high. But when children enter the picture, the stakes escalate exponentially. According to insiders who claim knowledge of Prince Harry's private life, the alleged decisions he faced after the shocking discovery were not only about trust and betrayal. They were about the children, their well-being, and the legacy of the family he was determined to protect. Imagine the scenario. A man grappling with a revelation so destabilizing that it forces him to pick up the phone and contact divorce lawyers, all while thinking about the two youngest people in his life, who have no voice in this complex web of trust, secrecy, and adult decisions. Every choice he made, every action he considered, carried consequences far beyond himself. According to reports, the children, Archie and Lilibet, were at the center of Harry's concerns. Not in a superficial sense, but in a deeply personal, protective sense. The alleged discovery, the feeling of being blindsided, and the resulting emotional withdrawal were all intensified by the responsibility he felt toward his children. The fear of allowing a fractured trust or misaligned intentions to impact their upbringing became paramount. Sources suggest that in the wake of this discovery, Harry's decision-making shifted from personal to strategic. Every interaction with Meghan, every potential public appearance, every private discussion about finances or guardianship was filtered through the lens of protecting the children. Emotional reactions alone were insufficient. Careful consideration of long-term impact became necessary. Insiders describe a man torn between two realities. On one hand, the raw emotion of betrayal and shock. On the other, the rational calculation required to shield his children from the fallout. The pressure, they claim, was almost unbearable. He couldn't simply react. Every step carried a weight that could reverberate through the children's lives for years to come. And then there was trust, or rather, the loss of it. According to sources, the discovery not only shattered the personal trust between Harry and Meghan, but also created uncertainty around co-parenting. Questions that might have been hypothetical in any marriage suddenly became urgent. How much can I rely on the other parent? What information is being withheld? How will the children perceive our conflict? And what long-term impact might that have on their sense of security? Trust, insiders argue, is the foundation of any relationship. But in this case, the alleged discovery fractured that foundation. And once trust begins to crumble, every decision is influenced by fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of public perception, fear of repeating patterns from the past, fear of failing the children in ways that can't be undone. One source reportedly told journalists that Harry was haunted by the thought of his children growing up caught in the middle. The phrase evokes the stark reality of high-profile divorces where children are inevitably drawn into the emotional crossfire. The fear was not only personal, it was protective. Every step he allegedly took after the discovery was measured against the potential impact on Archie and Lilibet. This fear also fueled the urgency behind the alleged call to lawyers. According to insiders, Harry's objective wasn't merely separation. It was clarity, boundaries, and legal assurances. Emotional decisions alone could not guarantee the protection of the children. Legal structure was necessary to ensure that, regardless of emotional volatility, the children's safety and well-being remained intact. But here's the complex, human element that often gets lost in public narratives. Children are not just strategic considerations. They are emotional anchors. Sources claim that even in the midst of profound shock and betrayal, Harry's love for his children shaped his actions. He was not reacting solely out of anger. He was calculating how best to shield them from a storm he had only recently realized was building. And yet, insiders also suggest that this very protective instinct complicated matters. The closer he considered the children, the more intense the emotional stakes became. Every decision carried dual responsibilities. Addressing the personal breach of trust while simultaneously preserving stability for two vulnerable lives. It created a situation where even seemingly simple choices, travel, schedules, public appearances, required layers of consideration, strategy, and foresight. This is where fear intersects with decisiveness. According to sources, Harry's alleged choice to contact divorce lawyers was informed not by impulse, but by a calculated desire to establish boundaries quickly. He reportedly understood that hesitation could exacerbate risk, compromise trust, and endanger the delicate balance of co-parenting. The lawyers were not a weapon. They were a mechanism for control, clarity, and protection. But even the most careful planning cannot erase the emotional weight of a fractured marriage. Insiders claim that Harry experienced moments of profound sadness and guilt. Moments when he questioned whether separation, even with legal safeguards, would ultimately serve the best interests of his children. The emotional complexity, they argue, was staggering, a mix of sorrow, resolve, fear, and protective instinct, all occurring simultaneously. And then there's the public dimension. The world was watching. Public perception, media narratives, and social commentary added pressure to an already volatile situation. Every rumor, every headline, every social media post had the potential to influence not only his personal life, but also the environment in which his children were growing. According to sources, this amplified Harry's urgency. The legal steps were as much about preempting public chaos as they were about personal clarity. Insiders also suggest that the alleged discovery forced Harry to reconsider long-term implications for his children. Beyond immediate emotional safety, he had to think about identity, heritage, and upbringing. How would decisions today shape their understanding of family tomorrow? How would they perceive their parents' choices? And crucially, how could he ensure that they were not collateral damage in an adult conflict that neither of them had asked for? The combination of betrayal, trust erosion, and parental responsibility, according to sources, created an environment where action was unavoidable. Harry allegedly realized that maintaining the status quo was no longer possible. Emotional processing alone could not address the complexity. Legal clarity was required. Boundaries had to be set. Protection had to be prioritized. Yet even as he allegedly took steps to secure that protection, uncertainty remained. Insiders claimed that he did not know how Meghan would respond, how family dynamics would shift, or how public perception might influence co-parenting. The fear was constant, layered, and inescapable. Every step forward carried risk. Every decision carried consequence. And here's the key point. In this chapter of the story, children, trust, and fear are inextricably linked. They are the driving forces behind the alleged decisions. They are the reason that action was not only necessary, but urgent. And they are the reason that, according to insiders, what came next was both deliberate and irreversible. The cliffhanger, as insiders report, lies in what Harry allegedly did after assessing the risk to his children, evaluating the erosion of trust, and confronting his fear. The next stage was not emotional alone. It involved strategy, confrontation, and a set of decisions that would fundamentally reshape the family. What happened next would test loyalties, challenge assumptions, and leave even those closest to him questioning what was real. Silence can speak louder than any statement. In the world of royalty, where every word, gesture, and appearance is meticulously calculated, what is left unsaid often carries the most weight. According to insiders, after Prince Harry allegedly made the decision to contact divorce lawyers, the reaction, or lack thereof, of the royal family became one of the most telling elements in the unfolding drama. Imagine for a moment the tension in Buckingham Palace, a private residence that doubles as a global symbol of tradition and authority. A space where protocol dictates behavior, where every decision is weighed against history, reputation, and public scrutiny. Now place a situation of unprecedented personal betrayal, legal maneuvering, and emotional upheaval right at the center of that institution. The stakes are monumental. Sources suggest that the palace did not respond publicly at first. There were no statements, no press releases, no denials. Silence, in this context, was strategic. According to insiders, the royal family understood that any public reaction could exacerbate the situation, escalate media speculation, and potentially harm the children caught in the crossfire. Silence, they believed, was a protective measure, but also a signal of containment. Yet behind the silence, insiders claim, there was intense activity. Private meetings, strategic consultations, and conversations with legal advisors reportedly took place to assess the implications of Harry's alleged actions. Discussions allegedly revolved around family loyalty, public perception, and long-term consequences. Every possible scenario was analyzed: reconciliation, mediation, total estrangement. The stakes were not just personal, they were institutional. The silence also carried emotional weight. According to sources, the royal family experienced a complex mix of feelings: shock, disappointment, sadness, and perhaps even anger. But these emotions were tempered by centuries of protocol. Outward displays of emotion were carefully managed, concealed beneath the veneer of tradition and composure. This is where the dual reality of royal life becomes stark. The personal and the public exist simultaneously, often in tension. One insider reportedly described the atmosphere as charged but controlled. Every member of the family was aware of the gravity of the situation, yet no one could afford a misstep. Public statements could be misinterpreted, leaks could fuel rumors, and any visible reaction could compromise the delicate balance of family, media, and institution. In essence, silence became a strategic tool, a way to manage the storm while assessing its full scope. But silence is rarely neutral. In this case, insiders claim it added pressure on Harry. The absence of immediate familial response, coupled with the weight of public expectation, reportedly intensified his sense of isolation. He allegedly felt cornered, not just by personal betrayal, but by the perception that he was navigating the crisis alone. And yet, the silence was not merely passive. According to reports, it allowed the royal family to mobilize quietly. Advisors were consulted. Potential interventions were discussed. Contingency plans for co-parenting, public appearances, and legal negotiations were developed. Every move was calculated to protect the institution while attempting to manage the personal crisis. What makes this chapter particularly compelling is the contrast between action and inaction. From the outside, It may have appeared that the palace was doing nothing, but insiders suggest that the silence was a form of controlled engagement, strategic, deliberate, and intensely observant. Every detail mattered: the timing of appearances, the wording of communications, the management of press inquiries. At the same time, the silence created a psychological landscape that was complex for Harry. Insiders describe a mix of relief and pressure: relief that no immediate public confrontation had occurred, but pressure from knowing that every step he took was being watched, assessed, and potentially countered behind closed doors. It was a delicate balance between autonomy and accountability, a tension that insiders say shaped every decision he made in the subsequent weeks. Adding to the complexity was the rumored internal division within the family. While the outward image projected unity, insiders suggest that privately, there were differing opinions on how to respond. Some reportedly advocated for direct engagement, others for continued silence, and yet others for subtle mediation. The competing approaches created a dynamic in which the royal family was simultaneously aligned and fragmented, a microcosm of the broader emotional turmoil. What is particularly notable, insiders claim, is how this silence forced Harry to operate in a vacuum of information. Without clear signals from his family, he allegedly had to make decisions about separation, co-parenting, and public communication largely on his own. The weight of responsibility, coupled with emotional turmoil, reportedly accelerated the urgency with which he engaged legal counsel and assessed options. Yet even within this silence, there were subtle signs. According to sources, discreet messages were sent, advisors consulted, and private conversations held, all intended to convey awareness and caution without triggering public exposure. These signals, while invisible to the media, were reportedly critical in shaping Harry's understanding of where the family stood and how much autonomy he had to act. It is here that the tension reaches a cliffhanger moment. Silence, as we know, can be both protective and threatening. According to insiders, Harry's awareness of the quiet observation around him prompted decisive steps that would further alter the family dynamic. The combination of private monitoring, subtle signaling, and lack of overt response allegedly contributed to a scenario in which legal action became not just a choice but, in his view, a necessity. And here's the critical point: the royal family's silent response was not passive indifference. It was strategy, but strategy in silence has consequences. It shapes perception, influences behavior, and, in this case, reportedly propelled Harry toward decisions that would have long-term personal and institutional implications. The mini cliffhanger, according to insiders, is this: behind the quiet calm, contingency plans were forming, plans that would eventually intersect with Harry's legal and emotional actions, creating a scenario more complex than any public observer could have anticipated. What happens next involves not just emotion and family, but the complicated reality of wealth, power, and legal entanglement, the arena in which personal decisions collide with public consequences. Money. It's a word that carries power, influence, and in high-profile marriages, enormous complexity. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, financial matters were never just numbers on a ledger. They were intertwined with personal freedom, public image, and, insiders suggest, the very foundation of trust. According to sources close to the couple, once the alleged discovery shook Harry's sense of trust, financial questions became urgent, unavoidable, and deeply personal. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't about vanity. It was about control, security, and clarity in a world where ambiguity could have far-reaching consequences. Think about it. In a marriage where both parties are high-profile figures with multiple income streams, brand partnerships, philanthropic ventures, and public scrutiny, finances are rarely straightforward. Every contract, every investment, and every expenditure is observed, analyzed, and often contested. The stakes are magnified when personal emotions enter the equation. Insiders claim that Harry's alleged first step after contacting divorce lawyers involved a careful review of assets, obligations, and financial entanglements. According to reports, he wanted to understand the full picture: what resources were shared, what agreements existed, and what potential risks could arise from a separation. The objective, insiders say, was not confrontation but comprehension. The complexity of this financial landscape cannot be overstated. Harry and Meghan's post-royal life involved multiple streams: Netflix contracts, Spotify deals, speaking engagements, philanthropy, and personal investments. Each element carried conditions, obligations, and timelines that could complicate any legal or personal separation. Understanding the financial implications was critical to protecting both parties, but particularly the children, insiders argue. Sources suggest that one of the most difficult aspects for Harry was assessing what had already been decided behind the scenes. Reports claim that certain arrangements, contracts, trusts, and investments were established with the expectation of mutual cooperation and shared trust. Once trust was allegedly shattered, the stability of these arrangements became uncertain. Every clause, every agreement, suddenly took on heightened significance. And it's here that the stakes get even higher. According to insiders, Harry was acutely aware that financial clarity wasn't just about money, it was about freedom. The ability to act independently, to make decisions without being constrained by obligations that relied on trust he no longer felt, became paramount. Financial independence, in this context, was a form of security, a protective barrier against unpredictability. But there's another layer: public perception. In high-profile separations, money is not just private. It's political, symbolic, and intensely scrutinized. Sources claim that Harry understood that any misstep could be weaponized in media narratives, fueling speculation, scandal, and even damaging his reputation as a father and public figure. The financial question was therefore not merely about logistics. It was about image management, risk mitigation, and long-term strategic positioning. This is where lawyers reportedly played a critical role. According to insiders, Harry engaged financial and legal experts simultaneously, not just to assess assets, but to develop strategies for safeguarding future interests. Every potential scenario, mutual cooperation, contested separation, public disputes, was considered. The aim, sources say, was clarity and control, ensuring that the personal fallout did not cascade uncontrollably into financial and public domains. Insiders also suggest that this stage was emotionally intense. Money, for Harry, wasn't the ultimate objective, but it was inseparable from the emotional and familial stakes. Every dollar, every contract, every agreement represented not just wealth, but the practical capacity to maintain autonomy, protect the children, and navigate an uncertain future with security. Financial considerations became a form of emotional armor. And yet, as insiders caution, this was not a simple arithmetic problem. Financial entanglements were intertwined with trust, loyalty, and past decisions. What might have seemed straightforward in ordinary circumstances became layered with historical context, legal nuance, and emotional significance. It was a landscape in which every misstep could have amplified consequences. What makes this chapter compelling, insiders argue, is the combination of practical necessity and emotional gravity. Harry allegedly understood that financial clarity would not resolve emotional pain, but it would provide the framework to act decisively. In other words, knowing exactly where resources, obligations, and leverage existed allowed him to make decisions from a position of strength rather than reaction. Sources describe this period as a delicate balancing act. On one side, the emotional shock of betrayal, the loss of trust, and the ongoing responsibility for children. On the other, the cold, rational assessment of contracts, obligations, and public perception. The interplay of emotion and strategy, insiders claim, created an intensity that few outside the inner circle could comprehend. And it is here that the chapter reaches its cliffhanger. According to sources, while financial review and legal consultation were underway, Harry allegedly discovered another layer of complexity, one that went beyond assets or obligations. Something hidden, overlooked, or perhaps carefully managed in the background that would dramatically influence both his decisions and the future trajectory of the family. What this entails, insiders say, will reshape not just the marriage but the larger narrative of power, control, and influence. And what Harry allegedly did next, once this hidden complexity became clear, marked a turning point from contemplation to action: irreversible, strategic, and deeply consequential money. It's a word that carries power, influence, and in high-profile marriages, enormous complexity. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, financial matters were never just numbers on a ledger. They were intertwined with personal freedom, public image, and, insiders suggest, the very foundation of trust. According to sources close to the couple, once the alleged discovery shook Harry's sense of trust, financial questions became urgent, unavoidable, and deeply personal. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't about vanity. It was about control, security, and clarity in a world where ambiguity could have far-reaching consequences. Think about it. In a marriage where both parties are high-profile figures with multiple income streams, brand partnerships, philanthropic ventures, and public scrutiny, finances are rarely straightforward. Every contract, every investment, and every expenditure is observed, analyzed, and often contested. The stakes are magnified when personal emotions enter the equation. Insiders claim that Harry's alleged first step after contacting divorce lawyers involved a careful review of assets, obligations, and financial entanglements. According to reports, he wanted to understand the full picture: what resources were shared, what agreements existed, and what potential risks could arise from a separation. The objective, insiders say, was not confrontation but comprehension. The complexity of this financial landscape cannot be overstated. Harry and Meghan's post-royal life involved multiple streams: Netflix contracts, Spotify deals, speaking engagements, philanthropy, and personal investments. Each element carried conditions, obligations, and timelines that could complicate any legal or personal separation. Understanding the financial implications was critical to protecting both parties, but particularly the children, insiders argue. Sources suggest that one of the most difficult aspects for Harry was assessing what had already been decided behind the scenes. Reports claim that certain arrangements, contracts, trusts, and investments were established with the expectation of mutual cooperation and shared trust. Once trust was allegedly shattered, the stability of these arrangements became uncertain. Every clause, every agreement, suddenly took on heightened significance. And it's here that the stakes get even higher. According to insiders, Harry was acutely aware that financial clarity wasn't just about money. It was about freedom. The ability to act independently, to make decisions without being constrained by obligations that relied on trust he no longer felt, became paramount. Financial independence, in this context, was a form of security, a protective barrier against unpredictability. But there's another layer: public perception. In high-profile separations, money is not just private. It's political, symbolic, and intensely scrutinized. Sources claim that Harry understood that any misstep could be weaponized in media narratives, fueling speculation, scandal, and even damaging his reputation as a father and public figure. The financial question was therefore not merely about logistics. It was about image management, risk mitigation, and long-term strategic positioning. This is where lawyers reportedly played a critical role. According to insiders, Harry engaged financial and legal experts simultaneously, not just to assess assets, but to develop strategies for safeguarding future interests. Every potential scenario, mutual cooperation, contested separation, public disputes, was considered. The aim, sources say, was clarity and control, ensuring that the personal fallout did not cascade uncontrollably into financial and public domains. Insiders also suggest that this stage was emotionally intense. Money, for Harry, wasn't the ultimate objective, but it was inseparable from the emotional and familial stakes. Every dollar, every contract, every agreement represented not just wealth, but the practical capacity to maintain autonomy, protect the children, and navigate an uncertain future with security. Financial considerations became a form of emotional armor. And yet, as insiders caution, this was not a simple arithmetic problem. Financial entanglements were intertwined with trust, loyalty, and past decisions. What might have seemed straightforward in ordinary circumstances became layered with historical context, legal nuance, and emotional significance. It was a landscape in which every misstep could have amplified consequences. What makes this chapter compelling, insiders argue, is the combination of practical necessity and emotional gravity. Harry allegedly understood that financial clarity would not resolve emotional pain, but it would provide the framework to act decisively. In other words, knowing exactly where resources, obligations, and leverage existed allowed him to make decisions from a position of strength rather than reaction. Sources describe this period as a delicate balancing act. On one side, the emotional shock of betrayal, the loss of trust, and the ongoing responsibility for children. On the other, the cold, rational assessment of contracts, obligations, and public perception. The interplay of emotion and strategy, insiders claim, created an intensity that few outside the inner circle could comprehend. And it is here that the chapter reaches its cliffhanger. According to sources, while financial review and legal consultation were underway, Harry allegedly discovered another layer of complexity, one that went beyond assets or obligations. Something hidden, overlooked, or perhaps carefully managed in the background that would dramatically influence both his decisions and the future trajectory of the family. What this entails, insiders say, will reshape not just the marriage but the larger narrative of power, control, and influence. And what Harry allegedly did next, once this hidden complexity became clear, marked a turning point from contemplation to action, irreversible, strategic, and deeply consequential.